Wanted to welcome everyone to our third session in our Impact Award series. If you've been joining us and following along the way, you know that I am Laura Weaver, Director of Professional Development with Campus Compact, and I am your host again for this year's series. Each year, Campus Compact celebrates shining examples of meaningful, impactful civic and community engagement work by highlighting presidents, faculty, community engagement professionals, students, and programs that illustrate the positive impact higher education can have for the public good happening at our member campuses across the country. Today, I have the distinct privilege of being joined by Rebecca Gillette, Associate Director and Community Engagement Lead with Mapping Prejudice, and Dr. Kirsten Delegard, Project Director for Mapping Prejudice and one of its founders at the University of Minnesota Libraries, and Amelia I had this. Amelia, I had this. I'm so sorry. Let me try again. Amelia Pelosis, and I still don't think I have
Pal-
it right. Amelia
Palacios.
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 Thank you. Thank you. Oh, Amelia, I'm so sorry. Who is the communications specialist for the program. Rebecca is going to be doing today's main presentation, while Kirsten and Amelia will be hanging out with us, adding some commentary in the chat, and then joining us for the Q&A after the presentation. Um, the project, Mapping Prejudice Project, was one of our 2026 Excellence in Civic and Community Engagement Programming awardees, and we are very excited to be highlighting it today. As Rebecca will share, the Mapping Prejudice program began in 2016 with main questions of how does structural racism get embedded in the built environment, and how does it persist despite years of legislative policy and cultural change? These are questions that are really central to the project, which is based at the University of Minnesota Libraries. It was developed a really rigorous methodology. And for those of you that have been with me along all of these different sessions, you know that it's something that I'm really excited to learn about because I'm a self-proclaimed nerd. So I'm very excited for this session. The methodology is rooted in partnerships with county governments and community organizations. It also built new grassroots partnerships by broadening the political imaginations of participants, which grew out of reciprocal relationships with change makers focused on challenging the logic of white supremacy. This project created the first comprehensive map of its type in an American city, highlighting how systemic racism shaped housing, wealth, and opportunity. This is groundbreaking work that inspired so many other communities nationwide to investigate their own histories and has partnered with many other different groups in California, DC, Massachusetts, North Carolina, and Wisconsin to create the world's largest database of its type to date. The project has reshaped scholarly research by engaging the public in uncovering urban history and structural racism. At the same time, it fosters a broader reckoning with unjust deeds, encouraging systemic change by making historical data accessible and participatory. Mapping Prejudice empowers community to pursue data-driven, community-led efforts towards equity. Again, you all never come here to hear me go on and on about these projects. You really come here to hear from our presenters. So now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Rebecca, who is going to tell you all about this groundbreaking project.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and just get an okay that you can see it.
Yep, we can see it.
Wonderful.
Stage is all yours.
Thank you so much. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rebecca Gillette, and I'm an Associate Director and Community Engagement Lead at Mapping Prejudice. Mapping Prejudice is based out of the University of Minnesota Libraries, located in Minneapolis, and it's situated on Minnesota Makoche, which loosely translates in the Dakota language to the land where the waters reflect the sky, and is the traditional homeland of the Dakota people. I'd like to first pay my respects to our collective Indigenous ancestors across the country and to honor past, present, and ongoing efforts to steward, care for, and protect these lands. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about myself and how I came to this work. I grew up in Minneapolis, and then I moved around the country and across the ocean. But like a true, well trained Minnesota Falcon, I returned to my home city about 15 years ago. I come to this work through a circuitous career route, but with a steady through line of community engagement. My professional background has always been working in predominantly white cultural organizations around the country to develop relationships with community members who have not had a seat at the table and to create projects, products, and experiences that tell stories of Black and Brown Americans told and led by them. Some of these stories were brought to life through things like programs, exhibits inside, or in this case, outside during COVID, capturing oral community narratives for website projects, and even through digital program played on iPhones by students, in which iterative design was a core process tool, an important lesson to be shared later in my talk. I was hired by Mapping Prejudice based on these professional experiences, as my expertise held perfect synergy with the project goals of examining the roots of structural racism. Mapping Prejudice also aligned with my personal and professional values. So here I am. I'd like to start the webinar by grounding us in the history of racial covenants and an overview of our work at Mapping Prejudice. I'll then share lessons learned, some best practices, and ways people might implement this type of work at their own institutions. I will end with plenty of time for questions, as I find it can be the richest part of a webinar. So, as I shared, Mapping Prejudice is located in Minneapolis, and it speaks to our project origins. Minneapolis routinely shows up in national magazines, hitting many of the top tens: best parks, best biking trails, most livable place to live. But what if we added the clause at the end of each of these phrases? For whom? And in particular, for whom is it most livable? If based on all of these qualities, we claim to be prosperous cities and viewed from across the country as a progressive haven for so many, everyone should benefit, right? Yet, when we look at the Twin Cities metro home ownership rates, there are huge disparities. 75% of white families own their own home, while only 33% of Black families can make the same claim. The Twin Cities has among the highest gaps between Black and white homeownership rates in the nation. With these statistics, many people question why there hasn't been substantial material change here, even after countless studies, reports, and task force have been conducted and convened around this issue. I'd like to put a pin in that question and answer it after I share more about our work. Our work at Mapping Prejudice examines the roots of this history to make sense of these contemporary statistics that I just showed you. Our current disparities are rooted in a critical turning point at the beginning of the 20th century, and that was the decision to use private contracts to reserve huge swaths of land for the exclusive use of white people. These private contracts were called racial covenants. They were rules that were inserted into home property deeds, such as this example, to keep people who are not white from buying or occupying certain pieces of land. For most of the 20th century, they were composed and promoted by a huge cast of characters: realtors, city planners, bankers, and elected officials. Racial covenants worked in concert with other practices like white violence, real estate steering, and redlining. I'm about to read some examples. So the language that you're going to see and hear is racist and frankly painful. So please be gentle with yourself as I read through them. The earliest racial covenant we have found in Minnesota was put in place by land developer Edmund Walton in South Minneapolis in 1910. The deed for this property included this racial restriction, which is pictured here, that stipulated, quote, "The party of the second part hereby agrees that the premises hereby conveyed shall not at any time be conveyed, mortgaged, or leased to any person or persons of Chinese, Japanese, Moorish, Turkish, Negro, Mongolian, or African blood or descent. Said restrictions and covenant shall run with the land." Walton inserted this same language into thousands of other deeds across the Twin Cities. Hundreds of landowners, developers, and city officials followed Walton's lead. They composed dozens of variations on the language he first put to text. So here are some additional covenants in which the language varies, but the intent is the same. No person of any race other than the Aryan race shall use or occupy any building or any lot. No person of any race other than the Caucasian race shall use or occupy any building or any lot, except that this covenant shall not prevent occupancy by domestic servants of a different race domiciled with an owner or tenant. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 made racial covenants illegal. Once this happened, there was a rush to forget, at least among white people. Our team is working to peel back this intentional amnesia and empower communities to engage in collective remembering. We're trying to create data to help Black and Brown communities and white accomplices demand systemic change. Mapping Prejudice started in 2016, really as an experiment, merging public history and technology as a transformative narrative about our history of structural racism. Mapping Prejudice was created to make Minnesota's structural racism visible and understandable to a wide range of people. We have centered our work on housing because housing is fundamental for well-being. It's what people in the medical world called social determinant of health. Our team resolved to do something no one had ever done before, and that was, as mentioned before, to build the first ever comprehensive map of racial covenants for an American city. We wanted to know some really basic questions, such as what did racial covenants actually say? Where were they used? How common were they? How much land did they cover? And we decided to answer these questions in an unconventional way. We took local digitized property records and used software to flag digitized documents that seemed to have racist language embedded in them. And then we harnessed the power of community. We flagged digitized property records on a crowd-sourcing platform called Zooniverse. Zooniverse, which invites community members from all backgrounds to participate in the work. We created a process in which people would locate information, as you can see here, on property records that would help us then put covenanted properties on a map. So we were not just a public-facing project. We are a co-created project. We do the data collection together in a rigorously researched process. It's such a powerful way to bring people in. We don't tell them the history. They uncover it on their own. Relatively simple information, as you can see, but transformational. So when we put this information on a map, this is what it revealed. Looking at this map, you can see the spread of racial covenants over time and how intentionally adding racial covenants to these property deeds created exclusive spaces for white people. The number of property records we're finding with racial covenants continues to grow daily. We've mapped covenants in 6 Minnesota counties, along with the cities of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Ann Arbor, Michigan, and their surrounding suburbs. Today, community members continue reading property deeds from 2 Minnesota counties and currently the cities of Washington, D.C. and the East Bay area near San Francisco. As a result of this work, we've received numerous honors and awards that affirm our work and the way in which we do the work. Of course, we're most proud of our Campus Compact Award. We're also proud of awards that recognize our community engagement work, such as our 2025 W.K. Kellogg Foundation Community Engagement Scholarship Exemplary Project Distinction, which recognizes exemplary projects that help four-year public universities become more closely and productively engaged with communities through their teaching, learning, discovery, and service activities. And our 2025 League of Minnesota Cities Cities of Excellence Award with the City of Mounds View's educational campaign and impact of racial covenants in their city. Our work has also been recognized by a wide range of disciplines and fields, such as our 2023 Advancing Diversity and Social Change Award from the American Planning Association Minnesota chapter, which highlighted our innovative data gathering and analysis methods that serve as a model for other communities across the country. Our 2021 Outstanding Public History Project from the National Council of Public History. And finally, our 2021 John R. Finnegan Freedom of Information Award from the Minnesota Coalition on Government Information, an award that comes from journalists who highlight work that defends the public's right to know in a way that makes a difference in Minnesota. These awards point to our methodology, which is simple but powerful. Bring community into the co-created process of identifying racial covenants with us. 2, then ask individual and collective community, what next? Now that the genie is out of the bottle, we can't turn away from this history. So what skills and or tools do we each have? And how can we each or collectively put them to work? What we discovered is that people respond to this work in compelling ways we could never imagine. A few examples have included Mapping Prejudice inspired an Emmy Award-winning PBS documentary, Jim Crow of the North, a film that has had more than 4 million views. A nationally recognized museum exhibit that explored the history of racial housing discrimination in Minneapolis through the stories of 3 Black families. The data served as the backbone of the Minneapolis 2040 plan, which has been hailed around the country as a daring new approach to land use guidelines. Our research inspired state legislation that helped property owners discharge their racial restrictions. With the passage of this bill, Minnesota became one of the first states to enable property owners to discharge racial covenants, and more than 20 states followed suit, passing legislation that makes it possible for property owners to discharge the language of racial covenants. And these efforts prompted the Uniform Law Commission to devote 2022 and 2023 to the drafting of model legislation on this subject. Other examples of Mapping Prejudice's co-creative work come in the forms of things like this beautiful artwork created by Daniel Arzola for promotional pieces, and graphic design created by students from Augsburg College's design and agency team that we could use to create a zine that would reach a younger audience. And finally, the hundreds of community members that led a years-long community campaign to strip a street named after Edmund Walton, who I mentioned before, the first person to put a racial covenant in Minneapolis, and to replace it with Lena Smith Boulevard, honoring Minnesota's first Black woman attorney and housing rights activists. Remember earlier, I asked why there hasn't been substantial material change in such progressive cities as Minneapolis and St. Paul, even after countless studies, reports, and task forces have been conducted and convened around this issue? What we have learned over the past 10 years of working directly with the community is that people cannot be motivated to address a crisis if they don't believe it exists. Yet when they believe it does and the crisis hits, they respond. So our team brought the community directly into the process, finding racial covenants. As people read through the property records to find and identify racial covenants, they come face to face with these primary source documents that show the receipts of our history. The co-created process is the core of our mantra. The process is the product. When racial covenant data is then put on a map, it becomes a powerful visual illustration of our history of housing discrimination and how racialized spaces in America were created. These processes change people's thinking and opens pathways to understand how we got to where we are today. Along the way and over the years, we discovered that the more people we brought into the making of this data, the more meaning can be made on an individual and collective level. The process has also affirmed our belief in the importance of how narrative change can shape material change. By bringing as many people into the process, we empower community members to advocate for repair. This is what crowdsourcing work does, inviting ordinary, everyday people in to create the data with us. That is the transformation. In the climate we are living in today, this people powered project sustains hope in this moment of historical erasure. This project is a project of historical recovery. So while this practice may be vastly different from the work that you do, I would like to share some of the best practices we've learned over the years that might be applied to any of the projects you're working on. First, we can't stress enough the importance of bringing communities into the collective work. They bring new voices and narratives to the work, change minds, create project advocates, and sustain the work going forward. It may add time to the work, which needs to be accounted for and supported. And if you move too quickly, you risk alienating community. But by slowly widening the circle, we have seen how it creates a greater tool to imagine and build a more just future. Second, people learn best through active engagement. Find ways that your work can bring people in as part of the work rather than just a report on what was accomplished at the end. In addition to our participatory community mapping sessions, we have also developed activities that provide hands-on learning and prompt dialogue with participants. Third, listen to and center the knowledge and perspectives of those most impacted by your work. In our case, this means attending to the lived experiences of Black and Brown communities situated within the enduring legacies of racial covenants. But really, all of our work, yours and ours, intersects with collective histories of racial exclusion. So spend time wherever your work lies, examining how historical forms of racialized inequities continue to shape your academic institution, organization, community, and the material conditions around them. This requires developing and implementing practices that are responsive and attentive to histories of racial exclusion. Some practices should not only seek to mitigate potential harms, but also protect and care for the historically excluded communities, ensuring that your work does not perpetuate or recreate harm. I saw this as a need in my work, leading community mapping sessions. This process is incredibly transformational. So here are some quotes from volunteers about participating in community mapping sessions. Reading and encountering the racist language in these historic property records can be incredibly eye-opening, affirming, and also painful. Black and Brown community members, based on lived experiences, are often hit more deeply with this language as they dig into the work of identifying covenants. I want to turn to this quote from Prentice Hemphill, who I believe speaks to what many participants verbalized in the mapping sessions. We learned somewhere along the way that we are to blame for our own hurt, our shame, the feeling that we don't belong. We bottle the secrets up, push them down, because we don't have the time or space to look them in the eye or to fall apart. Concealing this pain wears down our capacity for vulnerability and connection, and eventually our bodies too. Our stories need airing out and places to land. So we needed to attend and care for this exact experience at Mapping Prejudice. So we responded by partnering with Render Free to create a new program that centers those living with the legacies of racial covenants, using stories and healing techniques in a way that better prepares participants for the racist history and language ahead. Our Histories Are Healing explores the history of racial covenants through collective grief, guided embodiment, and healing. It provides a space to slow down with other Black and Brown folks, to learn and practice somatic tools to help when facing this painful history, and to really pause to decide whether or not they want to go ahead and engage in the subsequent community mapping sessions. We then developed a cohort of facilitators who could take this work out to share within their own networks. Our Histories Are Healing contributes to the broader processes of narrative change, helping communities recognize structural inequalities and inequities as the result of human decisions rather than inevitable conditions. If your work lies in hard histories or underrepresented communities, for example, you must build into your work ways in which you care for these community members so they will not be reharmed by your work. Finally, I encourage transparency, not only in talking about your work, but also in sharing it openly. Academia often has a culture of holding work closely, driven by the fear that someone else will get grants, publications, or academic advancement. At Mapping Prejudice, we take a different approach. We freely share our maps, our code, and what we casually call our deed machine workflow. We share any historical content we research and or write about, and space for dialogue and conversations with anyone who's interested in joining us. Our only request is that our work is properly credited. That openness has come back to us tenfold. By sharing generously, we've cultivated deeper relationships, strengthened collaborations, and expanded the reach and impact of our work. Those relationships and shared knowledge become the foundation for even stronger work in the future. I've already discussed these in depth, but want to point to these first as ways in which you might implement some of these tools into your own programming. But I'd like to share some other elements when creating co-created programs. So the first thing that I would say is 10 years ago is to start small. 10 years ago, our project started in a corner of our map library with 3 people exploring a question. None of the 3 co-founders would have ever believed that it would grow to where we are 10 years later. So be curious, explore, break through silos to bring in expertise from other areas, and begin with a pilot and really build from there. So I'm going to go back to finish the other one. Use stories. Use stories that are personal or otherwise. They can be a powerful tool when connecting with audiences. In all of our presentations, everyone on our team includes a personal story that connects to racial covenants. It both humanizes the data and shows our own vulnerability in sharing our stories, which can then open up the conversation with a larger group to share their own stories. All of this can be scary, yet provides an opening for all to talk about our complicated history of race in America. Narrative change can really move material change. The next thing that I would point to is time. We all know about deadlines, outcomes, and reports. But if you move too fast, you will miss something. You may harm community members, even face pushback. So take it slow and allow for flexible deadlines. In keeping with this element, I would say find, whoops, excuse me, I'm going to go back. I would say find someone in a senior position within your work unit who can champion your work and advocate for the slow, deliberate process. It will pay off. And finally, I really recommend iterative design in which failure is embraced. This is a great way to see what works and what doesn't. Failure is not bad. Failure actually provides amazing learnings, offering the chance to adapt and improve. In my first 2 years at Mapping Prejudice, for example, I led a community fellows program with 6 community change makers who we hoped would use our data in new and different ways. The end products were not always what we had hoped for, but the learnings were immeasurable and played a huge role in the development of our recent Our Histories, Our Healing facilitator cohort. I really state again that iterative design can be really helpful. It's simply create, refine, offer it again, rinse and repeat. I want to conclude by emphasizing that the work that we do at Mapping Prejudice is the work of a lifetime, not only because we're undertaking the task of mapping racial covenants across the country, but because we're also engaged in a much longer, harder work of reckoning honestly with our nation's history. The stories we tell, the questions we ask, and the relationships we build with communities are all shaped by the histories that came before us. We cannot separate the work of changing the future from work of understanding the past. That is why humility matters, openness matters, and a willingness to learn together matters. When we approach this work with those commitments, we do more than deepen our understanding of history. We build the trust and relationships that allow communities to heal, imagine, and create something different. It makes the way we do it all the more important as the process is the product. Thank you so much. And I look forward to some of the questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you so much, Rebecca. I am navigating a little bit of tech issues. So if just give me 1 second here to try and figure this out. Um, and then I will be hopefully with you. We are having some major storms going on, and it knocked my internet out, but I'm on my iPad. So, and Zoom on an iPad is a little different.
I wonder if I could help with that in just saying I can still see the chat functions. I don't know if I can see, I can't see people raising their hand, but if you put a question in the chat function, I'm happy to read it and try to answer that if that's helpful.
Yes, I can see the chat function. What I'm trying to navigate is how to unspotlight right now. So yes, if folks would like to put a chat question in the chat, and if you would like to raise your hand and ask a question, I can try and unmute you and we can go from there. But yes, if someone would like to ask a question in chat, we can go from there. I will say I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. Although I did miss about 3 minutes of it there while I was trying to get everything back booted up. But I'm sure that 3 minutes was wonderful.
Um, so Laura, we can also say that since the Mapping Prejudice team, that we have hosting power too.
Oh,
Don't
great.
stress too much about. I think we can help with some of the tech challenges. And I
Oh,
just want to
thank you
say
so much.
how impressed I am that your the internet went out and you still the show continued. So
Yes.
that's very impressive. Rebecca, so I'm Kirsten Delegard. I'm one of the co-founders of Mapping Prejudice. It's my privilege to work alongside Rebecca and Amelia, and it's been just again, like I have learned so much from the deep expertise that Rebecca has brought to the project, to Mapping Prejudice, and to the way she has developed our co-creative um, community mapping strategies and storytelling strategies. Um, so I know we are deeply ensconced in the history world, but I know that this group draws from people who are doing all kinds of different kinds of co-creative, community engaged work. So I would love to hear from the folks who are here with us, what kinds of projects they're working on, and whether they've ever done anything with with crowdsourcing or with oral histories or community storytelling or yeah. So what are the intersections with the work that Rebecca shared with us? I know that good teachers always have the capacity to sit through the silence. So we're wow, and it looks like the lights are out too, and where you are, Laura. So very impressive. Um, so um, I'm willing to sit in the silence, but also we could just chat. For those of us who are on who have our video have our cameras on too could just chat.
And
So.
I would also say I'm grateful to my colleagues for putting lots of resources in the chat function. So don't forget to click on those links if you have further questions about some of the things that we talked about.
And I will say I have copied all of those links down, and those will be shared out in the follow-up email. I am excited to watch and to visit some of those links myself. I am looking here. I think have found where I can also potentially allow folks to unmute themselves. Um, but yes, I loved and will and want to say thank you, Rebecca, for that end section where you said this is how you can apply our techniques to your own projects. Sometimes that can be the hardest things for people to sit there and think about when they come to a presentation that is so great and then they think, how can I take these lessons back home? And that was so applicable. And I could see myself sitting there thinking, yes, this is how I can utilize that technique in my project. This is how I can take these reminders back and share them with others on my campus. And so I just want to say thank you so much for that, because I know sometimes that can be the hardest part of attending a webinar, going to a conference. You have all of these great ideas, but then it's like, when you get back home and think, how can I do that at my campus or in my community? So I just want to thank you so much for that. I did see there was something in the chat. Yes, love the presentation. And this person, Anthony, is on the website now and wants to know where they can find the impact report of the project. Oh, Kirsten, you are
Oh,
muted, which is
right.
something I
Yeah.
always do.
Right. Yeah. So eager to jump in. So we don't have a single impact report for Mapping Prejudice, but our collaborators at our local public television station, the people who created Jim Crow of the North, the Emmy Award-winning documentary that Rebecca talked about, it did this very extensive impact report that I've just shared the link to in the chat. That gives a sense of after several years of doing this work together, what were we able to discern about like what is impact? And the thing that I love about this impact report, which is by a woman named Amanda Hain, is that she goes beyond, I would say, more conventional metrics of impact of measuring impact to really, she did very in-depth interviews with people. Um, and did very creative things like looking at Google mentions of racial covenants and how that changed over time, how it really entered into the lexicon of everyday vocabulary. And so, because we were very, I would say, intrigued by this concept that Rebecca turned to several times about like how does narrative change produce material change? Because I think those of us who work in this field know that to be true, but we wanted to have some harder um, data, qualitative data or quantitative data to really try to demonstrate those connections. Um, so. Yeah, so the impact report is great. Amelia, would you mind finding our CV? Is our CV online? I think that's another nice overview of some of the outcomes and collaborations of the project.
One question I do have, and again, because I am the nerd, always in these sessions, I always wonder about for folks that are maybe newer to the some of the methods or some of the techniques that you utilize, especially in the community gathering spaces of how you go about some of those techniques. Do you have any resources that you would recommend of, I'm bringing folks together and I want to do some of those more interactive activities, or how do I think about doing some of that? Any good resources that you may point to or other organizations that you may point to that are kind of places that people can get started in wanting to implement some of this. Um,
I would, I think I would respond. I can try to look for some. I wish it was this incredibly research intensive way that you do this process. But what I would say in response to that is showing up often at community gatherings. It's a slow build. It's about taking the time to go to spaces that you go to regularly, but also other spaces that you wouldn't normally go, and developing relationships with people in the community because really it's about building trust. And then it's about listening. So I think the other thing that I would say is, as I mentioned in the presentation, when we do these presentations in all sorts of community spaces, I've spoken to two people in a church basement. I've spoken to 200 in an auditorium. I've spoken in rural and in urban settings. By sharing, by being vulnerable, that opens up, I think, some vulnerability in the people listening to the presentation, and just so creating that, I think, atmosphere that will allow people to engage in dialogue with other people.
oh
I think
yes,
And
100% with all of that.
and I will also add to what Rebecca just said by saying I think one of our central tenets is that in part through our sharing our own personal story, we want to make it clear like that we are part of this. We're not standing outside and like shaking our finger or trying to induce any kind of shame and or being like the outside experts. We always try to cultivate this sense of like we're all in this. We come from different positions, but this is something that we're all involved in. We're all complicit in these structures, in these systems. So I can always feel whenever I present about the history and share my family story, I can feel the energy in the room shifting at that
Hmm.
moment when I say, "Oh, my grandparents who were immigrants bought a house that had racial covenants in Minneapolis," and that I can feel people saying, "Oh, so you're not saying it's my fault. Like you are saying this is about all of us." So I would say that is one of the really core things that we all do as a team to build that space. And then, of course, the work that Rebecca is doing with Ariel for the Our Histories, Our Healing. And do you want to talk about any of the core learnings from that, like how the mapping sessions have changed with Ariel's through Ariel's guidance and collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was more formal in the presentation about what I saw, but I think it was just I led these community mapping sessions for 2 years, and I just saw this sort of repetitive pattern of how people talked about the experience 'cause we leave space for dialogue at the end of each of the sessions, which anybody is welcome to join us. We offer them twice a month, so if they want to learn. And I think the notion of taking care of those most impacted by racial covenants was just it just kept coming back again and again. And so that is when we decided that it was really important to do some pre-work before people go in and are confronted with this language. And I will say some of the learnings that come out of the work that I've done with Ariel Grant, who's the founder of Render Free, is things that can be incorporated into our general presentation. I didn't do it today because of time, but these somatic tools that help ground us sort of in our three centers of intelligence. We have our head, which is our rational. We have our heart, which is sort of the emotions that come up when we see this, and even our body. So we see painful language, there's like a tightening in the chest.
Mhm.
So practicing some simple somatic tools that can be used both in our work, but really out in the world as well, that can kind of bring anxiety and sentiment down so that people can actually engage in the work a little bit better. That can be so painful because that is not our goal to reharm community members. And we also, by doing it as a prequel, it sort of provides the intro to say, now we have a community mapping session that you are better prepared for, but you also have a choice. You can say, this is too hard. I see through the session, this is really painful or too hard. Or now I'm better equipped and I really appreciate rather than getting hit with this really hard racist language that we've given you samples of.
And I will say that we are hearing, and I think this is especially pertinent in Minneapolis, where this project started, that we have gone through a lot in this community from I think we lost our host. um, but we'll keep going. So from 2020 to the present, we've gone through a lot as a community. And we've really seen a lot of people really focus on this trauma-informed work, which we believe is really essential. So I'm not sure what we should do now that we lost Laura, but maybe she will come back.
Well, here's what we could do. We have just a few minutes left. If there are any other questions, we could answer those. If not, we can give you time back. And then we can talk internally as a co-host the recording. Um, any other questions that people might have that we can answer? So I'll just say maybe also at the end, which I could look for on our, is we have a lot of great resources that I can look up to and put in, but we would welcome any of you to join us for a community mapping session. We offer them twice a month. It's Minnesota time, but if you can translate that to wherever you're living, is it's usually noon and then 7. So we try to capture people in the middle of the day or during the lunch hour, and then in the evening. And then our histories, our healing session is once a month on Thursdays, which you can just look on our attend an event, which I think was posted earlier, to find a date that works for you.
Laura, you are very impressive that you keep um, keep um, keep reappearing despite some serious technical challenges. So,
It's
and maybe that is also a learning of community engaged work that you have to be prepared for the unexpected at any time
yes.
and be able to not not expect everything to
Yes.
necessarily go as planned, which you have demonstrated. Sometimes it's better to show and not tell, right?
Yeah.
That's you've done.
I just want to
Yes.
add that some of the things that I just put in there's a bullet at the bottom that says to learn more about the University of Minnesota's place in this history. This is an example of one of the many story maps that we have created. And you can take a look at this one. And this one in particular is because we are based out of the University of Minnesota. And one of the things that we think is really important is to acknowledge our institution's role in this history of creating racialized spaces or racial discrimination, and the University of Minnesota is not immune to that. And so we want to make sure that we share that. So I think that's another tip for those of you doing this work is take a look at your own institution and do some research and find that and talk about it because that's important to do. Any final questions before we end today?
I have a quick one, and you may have covered this when I was not here, but your mapping sessions, are those virtual or are those in person?
I just did when you were gone, but they are virtual. It's a good
Okay, great.
question. We
Great.
do
I will
we
go
do
back
do
and
them
catch up then.
yeah, we do them in person, but mostly localized spaces but I can if there was a specific group that was large enough, maybe through Campus Compact, I could also provide a transcription or excuse me, a community mapping session for a group at another university if you had a large class that had a specific time. I've done that in the past as well.
We will keep that in mind for sure. The other thing that I was thinking a lot about too, as we were sitting here talking, was some of the resources that had come to mind that I don't know if any of you have used. Um, are some of the things around like general mapping activities. And I'm thinking about like asset mapping that like ABCD network has. And like I could see some of those techniques like overlapping in various ways. And I think when I was thinking earlier about some of those types of resources, and if you had utilized anything like that, about some of their resources, or if you knew of other resources that were similar to that, that may be helpful. So
Um,
that's maybe just a final point around that type of things.
I love that connection, and I would say that the asset-based sort of paradigm is very core to what we do. Even though we're obviously documenting structural racism, we make it's a very core part of our praxis to both tell stories and illuminate the strength and resilience of communities, right? So I'm just looking. I'm just pulled up this the the mapping uh, the reference that you made, ABCD mapping, which is very cool. We have done, Rebecca and Amelia have developed a couple of hands-on experiential learning opportunities with, I'm thinking of the Old South Side activity. Rebecca, do you want to
Yeah,
talk about that?
sure. So the Old South Side in Minneapolis is one of three historically Black neighborhoods in the Twin Cities. And so it's analog, but so it's not something that we would be able to share virtually. But what we have done is talked about this community with the stories, the richness of the community that people have to kind of find a point on the map to research it and to talk about it and to dialogue it. And then we also have transparencies that then roll over those to show some of the external impacts. Um, that that came into play, whether it was the freeway, whether it was racial covenants, whether it was redlining, um, just to show the interplay of external forces versus the internal strength within the community, and to have those conversations and to teach people about the history of these neighborhoods that many people don't know about. Because some of these communities have either dispersed or grown or places that are no longer exist. So it's a great way to educate people about these neighborhoods.
Yeah, I
Mm.
love that. I love that. When you were going over like the different things that you um talked about and the principles of your sessions, that's where like that overlap came for me with ABCD network of, honoring the expertise from within the community, honoring all of that. And that's where that light bulb moment happened for me of like, yes, these are the foundational principles there are very similar. And so it would be so interesting to see those different overlaps and to do kind of almost like a compare and contrast type of thing. Yes, the end is the end products may be different, but the foundational principles are really similar.
Yeah,
So it'd just
that's
be
great.
super interesting. Um,
Thank you for that. That's really
yeah,
interesting, and we'll take a
I'm
look at that.
really sad I had all of these technical difficulties with my weather, but because I did have other questions, but it just means we'll have to be in conversation more. And I do want to thank you all, first of all, for being great co-hosts as I navigated all of these difficulties today, but then also for a wonderful presentation. I know we've got folks here that are yearning for more information. We will be sure to get all of the links and the session materials out to everyone quickly. And again, thanks to everyone for joining us for this session of our Impact Award series.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you everybody for attending. It was great to be here.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day, everyone.
Take care. Be safe.
Take care. Bye bye.
Yes.
Bye.